Hello everyone, good to see you again. It seems an absolute age since I've done any terrain, so I'm going to just dive straight into it, have a quick scavenger hunt and see what I can find. Alright, I'm going to use this as the hero piece, sort of the centre point to give focus to the model. It's a turret from back when I did the oak tanks that was left over. Got a selection of pre-cut bases here that I found, so I'll nab one of those. Oh, and I've got some foam off cuts here from when I was doing the Dragon's Lair. They'll come in handy for when I'm building the base up. A few bits and bobs in here. I think that was back when I did the craters. So yeah, some chunks of masonry slab there. And I might try popping a bit of that on, just for some, you know, distressed wire. Fencing, that kind of thing. Plenty of sprues and bits and bobs to cut up. And of course we've got loads of other odds and sods like scrap card, lolly sticks, plastic card, wire, ground cover. So let's get straight into it. Now first thing that I want to do is a couple of modifications on that turret. There's a few excess pieces that I want to get rid of. So let's get rid of that holding mount and disconnect the barrel. Right, and I'm going to snip that away so that I can have the sort of barrel armour plate sitting far more flush with the rest of the piece. So I'll super glue that on there. I'll trim that down as well because that's just going to get in the way. That's canny. Oh, and I want to shorten the barrel a little bit because I sort of envisage it being covered over, but that is too nice a little piece to just discard because that looks like a pipe joiner to me. A bit of super glue. Just get that on a plate glued on like that. Now let's see what kind of size of base we're after. Probably a bit small. Probably a bit small as well. I'm probably going to have to go for one of the larger ones. Yeah. Alright, I'll use that one and we'll build that up. Right, I've grabbed a bit of foam that is round about the right size. I'll just snap some of that off, sizing it up. Yeah, that'll all fit on nicely. Right, I'll get that glued down. Now, this foam was left over from the Dragon Lair build and I've just used neat PVA, loads of it. As you can see, it's squishing out the side just to get that stuck on the base. And I do like working with this stuff. It will take a spray paint, which is really good. But as you can see before, you know, you can pick bits off with your fingernails and there's no mess. And it will certainly carve really easily with a craft knife. So even when we've got it in place like that, if we're trying to, you know, make something fit onto it and this is a little bit big, we can just hack bits out. Not a problem. Right, my original idea of having the barrel depressed down into something is not going to be a goer, but that's fine. We do want it front and centre, so I reckon about there, and then I can pack around it, which is good. So we'll get a decent splodge of PVA around there, and of course where it's sort of sat, chances are I'm going to be putting cover around there as well, so that will mask anything realistically untoward. Get that on there, just grab a lolly stick and where it's around the edges just to kind of adhere it more properly to the base. I'll just build up a wee bit of PVA around there. As you can see, this one is a nice fast build because it's wreckage. we are not particularly taking our time with it. Right, I'm happy with that position, so that'll dry for a little while. I'll move it to one side and we'll get on with something else. You've seen me do this trick before. It's just pressing into a thin strip of card on a block of wood. I did this in the oak tank video. I'll leave a link up top for that one if you want to check that back out. And it basically just gives a riveting effect when you turn it over, and cut out a wee bit of card. And that's the thing, you don't need to make these bits all that big and scrap stuff. In fact, I am going to leave that sort of raggy end on there just to stress it down a little bit more. Don't mind that it's sort of bent and buckled. Snip that off, bit PVA. And then pop that on there like that. Alright, and that's a nice, you know, big easy sort of plate that can just go straight on the side. Right, next up, let's grab some lolly sticks. Drag the ends up a bit, grab a file just to stress it a wee bit more. I can always come back to that before it gets put on. Right, I'll let that dry and then I'll distress that before it goes on. And I am actually going to start laying some of these bits on here, because the quicker I get it on, the less time I am waiting for it to all dry. Yeah, get you on there, hide that big cut mark. And yeah, I have left a bit of a gap under there. That can be filled in with basically whatever I want. Right, I said I was going to try some of this stuff. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. Pop a bit around the back here. Put that down. Alright, and it's starting to take shape. So I've added a few more bits. There's some planking has been stuck in there. This was part of an old MDF building sprue. So basically, yeah, you can use absolutely anything for these kind of scrap heaps. And I've got that planking glued on at the back. Now, yes, we've got things sticking up and out, and we've got things laying around the side. But just remember, with these models, you can just do a wee slice and fit stuff in, just to get a bit more sort of interesting cover onto your model. I'm not particularly bothering to glue these bits in place because it'll all get held there when I do the rubble ground cover and the sealer on that. So yeah, actually poking up and through. Alright, so yeah, we're trying to get things at different angles and not make it sort of like one of those old 1970s cheese hedgehogs that you used to get at buffets. Get some bits of wire. I think on these ones, even though it'll be a little bit dodgy on your fingers, I am going to fray that out so that it actually looks like it's old cable, as opposed to, you know, piping or something like that. A couple of them draped out of the tank, they'll look good. Alright, I'll get these glued in place and I'll get a few more odds and ends of stuff on there, and then we will move on to putting some ground cover on, and I've got an industrial rubble mix for that. And I'm going to do that in layers, and I'll show you why. Okay, loads more big items have been added on. More wires, more plates, a few pipes, things like that. Really happy with the way it's looking. And I'm going to stop it there, and we're going to start applying the ground cover. Now, I have mixed up here some of my traditional PVA with soapy water. Now, I've made it quite thick this time I've probably used about, I'd say 3 parts PVA to 1 part soapy water, because the industrial mix is quite heavy and I do want a decent adhesion. Now I'm just using a small brush to start off with, just to kind of get round behind the sort of dodgy areas. For the larger areas I'll swap to a bigger brush and I'll get this all covered, then you'll see us pop the actual ground cover on. Alright, we've got a decent slathering of PVA over it, and this is going to be the ground cover I'm using. Now you may not be able to see through the jar, but this is a mix of builder sand, coral sand for fish tanks, and there's loads of little sort of offcuts, bits of sprue, bits of card, bits of wire, anything that kind of looks man-made, just so that it looks as if it should be from, well, more modern. So I'll just get a decent covering over the whole lot, and with some of these sharp sides I might need to kind of prop it up at an angle. And yeah, I mean, you can see all those extra little bits just scattered in and around it. Right, just give it a wee press, make sure it's got into any underhangs, and then I'll give that a decent half hour to dry off. Right, so dried for about half hour and I've shaken the excess off, and you can see there's little odds and ends of extra little sort of detail bits that are sitting around in that ground cover. Now the problem with those and with the larger bits of coral sand is that when I come to dry brush them, there is a very good chance that they'll just flake off, even if I have put an undercoat on. So what I have done is mixed up some of this. Now it is 1 part isopropyl alcohol, 1 part PVA, and then 5 parts my usual soapy water. And the whole idea is that it is a nice runny mixture, and it'll go on with this dropper bottle, I hope, because it's a brand new dropper bottle and I haven't tried it. And it basically just sinks in, and you just douse the whole lot in this stuff and it will seal around it. There's a couple of blobs in there, so when you make it up, do make sure that you mix it through properly. I can always put a bit more cover on that, so that's not a problem. And just get it all sealed up, and then that will have to wait for a good little while to dry off. Change of venue, I'm actually out in the games room because the main crafting table is in use for another project, but we will crack on with this. Now I am about to start adding some of the masonry blocks, and just for quickness I am going to be using super glue just to get them in place. Get a dab on there, and as you can see it is just old bits of plaster of Paris, and I'm just going to dab them around to give it that little bit of extra realism of just industrial debris that has been thrown about the place. Now I'm just going to use some neat PVA, and I'm just going to put a few dabs around where I've got that new stuff, just to kind of allow a bit more ground cover to go on and sort of blend it in. Then I've decanted just a little bit of that off, just so that I can hit those exact spots rather than cover the whole model. Then once that's had a chance to dry, I'll tap it off, use some of the sealer again, and then it is going to be ready for an undercoat. Right, I've made a mistake. Ignore the fact that it has been base coated, because I actually missed a step. And it is the last modelling step, but it's a new one for this channel, and it is a rust effect. Now, essentially, what we do is we just get some super glue, and I'll do it on this plate here, and all you do, put a bit of a splot of super glue, and I'll do it on the edge there as well, and essentially this is to give it a far more sort of like bubbly, rusty effect, just by adding a bit of texture to it. And this is baking soda, so rather than making it sort of like an adhesion agent, all you're doing is sort of roughing it up and making it a bit more textured rather than all flat. So I will go ahead and do all the rest of the rust on this, get it re-undercoated after I've got all of the excess baking soda off, and then we will get to the paint job. Alright, paint time, and this is going to be a new technique. I'm using this as a test piece. It's a new technique on this channel, and as you can see I've gone away from my usual grey, black or white undercoat, and I've used a brown undercoat. Now that is primarily because an awful lot of the stuff is going to be sort of rusty, and brown also does lend itself well to dirt. So for the most part the ground has been given 2 different dry brushes of lighter and lighter browns, and then I finished it off with a light grey flick over the top just to catch the highlights. I've painted in the timbers a little bit better, and then I've done the block colouring. Now, instead of sort of brushing as you normally would, this is more of a sort of dab, because what you want to do is sort of avoid any recesses like this and leave that brown there. You can see where I've done it around the sort of rust areas on that plate as well. A couple of the larger sort of flatter areas I have given a wee bit of a highlight, and again it's dabbing, and I've just been using ripped up bits of sponge held in a pair of tweezers and dabbed it on rather than use a dry brush where that's going to leave brush marks. So it gives a sort of more mottled highlight effect. And I also used a bit of gunmetal just to dab on some of those metal areas as well, especially around the edges of the plates. And to be perfectly honest, I am really happy with the way that it's turned out at this stage. I am almost inclined to stop there. However, I do want to continue with this technique because, as I said, this is going to be the test and I want to use it on a larger model that I am already working on. So I want to see how it comes out on this. Now this next bit is going to be stinky, so please use a well ventilated area. I'm going to make an oil wash, and there's a lot of colours that can be used, but I am going for some burnt umber and some burnt sienna. And this is mineral turpentine, essentially white spirits, and this is the part where it gets really smelly. And you want this apparently about the consistency of milk. So let's see what that is going to turn out like. And this is going to take a little bit of mixing, so I will take the opportunity to ask you to hit like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, because there's loads more stuff coming out. If you want to buy me a coffee, the Ko-Fi link is down there. But that is of course not mandatory. And then I am using a relatively large brush and I am just going over the whole lot of this. Now I am going to try and avoid the timber parts. I don't want those washed, but everything else is going to get a wash of this. Now it's entirely possible I've got this a little bit on the runny side, but then you basically just dab off the excess on the big areas and then you leave that to dry for a good little while, because oil stuff does tend to take a wee bit longer to dry than other paints. But that is nicely dirtied up. Last couple of little bits just to finish it off. I'll show you that splodge technique. Just grab off a bit of foam like that, and I'm going to use my new / old different colours for rust. Get a bit of orange on there, pair of tweezers, and then just use this over all of those really rusty bits. And then exactly the same with some old brown over those same areas where you've done the orange, just to get that dulled down and look a bit on the older side. Then the very last thing I'm going to do, and this is just using old household paint, is pay some attention to those masonry blocks and just basically do sort of like an overbrush, just to pick those out. Time for some glamour shots. And you know what? For a lot of scraps and leftovers from other projects, I'm really happy with that. And I am certainly happy about the way that that new painting technique has turned out. It's always good to learn new techniques and add them to your models. And if you compare back with one that I did a couple of years back, I think you can see the way that just with a few new techniques and some practice, everything starts coming together and your models start looking absolutely brilliant. Anyway, that is about it from me for this time. There is another build coming up and it is a big stomper of a one. So keep an eye out for that. Until then, toodle pip.